any of these, we wouldn't have Bitcoin anymore. And some of them include proof of work, cryptographic timestamps, the difficulty adjustments, a very, very underrated aspect of Bitcoin, peer-to-peer network architecture, hash functions and Merkle trees, public key cryptography, and the block subsidy halvening. So a lot of that might sound completely foreign to you right now, but we'll definitely be touching on most of them through this chapter. So you'll have a much better understanding of what each of those are by the end. If you want a deeper technical understanding than we'll even cover in these 3 hours, then you can find more resources in the back of the student workbook. And if you're really technically minded, you can do little worse than reading Andreas's own Mastering Bitcoin, which is a technical Bible on Bitcoin. So it's also free. You can go to Andreas's GitHub and you can download his books for free there. And then you can also register on the My First Bitcoin website for the Bitcoin Diploma Technical Edition, which will hopefully be coming sometime next year. As you'll see in this video over here, and let's just check first how long it is, because it's a good 22 minutes here, and it's going to cover a lot of the same material that we're going to actually cover in the slides. So what I'll do is I'll post a link to that video here in the chat. You can also find it in the student's workbook and also in the slides. So I'll share the slides as well. And then I will leave that for you guys to watch in your own time. It's about 20 minutes long. And it'll go a little bit deeper into some of the aspects of that we'll be going into. It goes in a little bit more thoroughly. So the Bitcoin, just to sum it up though, basically the Bitcoin network is simply a ledger or record of transactions stored on multiple computers called nodes. And these are all across the globe. There's tens of thousands of them. The Bitcoin ledger is pseudonymous, meaning it doesn't have personal details, only the transaction and address information, as in the Bitcoin address information, right? It's not the user's address. The ledger shows every Bitcoin and its movements since the network started on January the 3rd, 2009. Next, we'll take a closer look at the technology that makes this system possible. And before we do, we can just have a quick look, and you guys are probably quite familiar by now with mempool.space. Which just demonstrates for us the transparency of the network. You know, we can all publicly see every single block that has been mined from the very first block, the Genesis block, all the way through to the most recent block. Not only that, but we can see all of the pending transactions, the transactions that are waiting in the queue over here to be included in the blockchain, but haven't been included yet because the block hasn't been mined. So completely transparent public ledger, accessible to anybody who can run a Bitcoin full node or access somebody else's, like I'm doing here. But of course, I don't need to rely on mempool.space. I could run my own full node at home and verify all of this data for myself. But we'll get a little bit more into that as we go. Again, we have Andreas telling us that what Bitcoin gives us is a hard promise. The program will execute exactly as specified, which is perfect, right? Because nobody can cheat or bend the rules. It's going to do what it says on the tin every time. Another way we express it in Bitcoin is tick tock, next block. Right. So let's get into it then. To begin with, we need to understand public private key cryptography. So you all have heard of cryptography by now, very important element of Bitcoin. When we talk about public and private key cryptography, we're referring to the process of encryption and decryption. Encryption is the process of taking information and transforming it to a special code, making it unreadable to anyone who doesn't have the correct encryption method. Similar to locking a person with the correct combination open. And then decryption is the process of encrypted and making it readable again. It's like safe and being able to read information inside. Of course, at the decryption message be so the person who will decrypt needs to understand decryption method needs how it was. So, for instance, say the oral message is for anyone else to read. He can use big pen cipher. Is this at the bottom here? You see this little grid of bits. We've got A, C on this little grid, and is basically a symbol. You can represent corner. That's B, a little U shape. That's upside down. U, C shape, E, box, and the dot in it, with a dot in it. T, what would you call it? Greater than sign. U, the reverse. So this is known as a cipher. This is what we'd use in this example to decrypt this message at the. You can see 3 symbols. Each of the symbols are letters below. Okay, so let's say the justice are all a secret message. They're going to use this encryption method, the pig pen cipher, in order to the messages in them. Only cipher encrypt the message, made unreadable else. Anybody else, these bills here, they would have a hard time figuring out what they rented, right? Though this method is considered secure today, it does illustrate the principle of making private key to send solve the cipher already, but let's read here. When solving pen cipher, the player is given an encrypted message, which is this at the top. These 3 symbols represent 1 letter each, so it's a 3-letter word. To decrypt the message, the player will find the symbol from the encrypted message, the encrypted cipher at the bottom. So, has anybody worked out yet what these letters are? A clue. The first letter there, you can see. Hence the P. There we go. In Africa, you G. Got a feeling though you've before. I hope you all understood that. Let's move on. Could not get stuck on it. If you don't, go back and review it in your own time. It's not that complicated. Ask ChatGPT if you get stuck. So, how does cryptography work in Bitcoin transactions then? Because surely we can't use the pig and cipher for our Bitcoin transactions. Traditional private cryptography, John and R would have to first share the secret key, which in this case, that's pigpen cipher or password. Then use key to encrypt his message before sending it to Arl. Arul, who also knows the secret key or password, would then use the same key or password to decrypt the message and read it. And that's all Dory, right? Except, what if someone else is in possession of the key and intercepts the message? They could then also decrypt it and read it. Obviously, a very important consideration in times of war. So public key cryptography, the type which is used in Bitcoin transactions, has solved this problem. With public key cryptography, John and Arul don't need to share the password or the encryption method with each other. Instead, they each have two different keys. They have a public key, which is safe to share with anybody. I disconnected there for a second. They each have two different keys. They have a public key, which is safe to share with anybody. And then they have a private key, which is very important that they keep private and safe. In this case, when John wants to send a message to Arul, he can use Arul's public key to encrypt his own message before sending it to Arul. When Arul receives the message, only he is able to decrypt it with his private key. So anybody else who receives that message would be unable to read it because they cannot decrypt it without Arul's private key. Chances are also then much lower that the keys get stolen because even John and Arul don't need to share the keys with each other, right? So the main advantage of public key cryptography over private is that it allows for secure communication without the need for the sender and receiver to first share a secret key, which is very important, right? If I want to send you Bitcoin to the other side of the world, I don't want to have to first have to share a secret key with you because I don't know that like our communications aren't compromised. And then I don't know if I subsequently try and send that Bitcoin to you, somebody intercepts my message, right? So it, it's a very, very essential part of Bitcoin, this private public key cryptography, because it means we don't have to share our private, well, we don't share our private keys, which could be intercepted by third parties. In Bitcoin, public key cryptography is not used to send encrypted messages, though. Instead, it's used to create unique digital signatures that make Bitcoin transactions immutable. A digital signature is a way to prove the authenticity of a Bitcoin transaction in some way similar to when you write your signature on a physical document or check. Public key cryptography for every transaction between two users. Each user has two keys, a private key, which is kept secret, and a public key that can be shared with others. The private key serves as a form of identification and proof of ownership, confirming this address belongs to me and I have control over it. Digital signatures are created to identify unique transactions. Here is just a little infographic showing us the process of a digital signature. John signs a message with his own private key, encrypting it. So that message is now encrypted and signed by John. And anybody can then take John's public key to verify that that document is signed with John's private key. So they then know for a fact that this message was signed by John and therefore could not have come from anybody else. Bitcoin transactions involve transferring a certain amount of Bitcoin directly to another person's account. Only the real holder of the Bitcoin has control to send their money to someone else. It makes sure that the property is guarded from malicious actors. As an additional measure of protection, each transaction that you send automatically gets a unique signature. This signature is empowered by tamper-proof technology that helps the network verify that the real owner of the Bitcoin and not someone else has sent them. So how this works in a real Bitcoin transaction in simple terms: one, you create the transaction, You initiate a transaction by specifying the details, such as the recipient's address and the amount of Bitcoin you're going to send, along with the miner's fee. Then digital signature generation. The sender generates a unique digital signature using their private key. This signature is a unique cryptographic code that verifies the authenticity of that specific transaction. Then, broadcasting the transaction. The signed transaction is then broadcast to the Bitcoin network, indicating the intent to transfer ownership of Bitcoin from the sender to the recipient. And then finally, verification on the network. Nodes on the Bitcoin network receive the transaction and use the public key of the recipients to decrypt and verify the integrity of the transaction. Simultaneously, they use the sender's public key to verify the digital signature. We'll go through that process practically before the end of the session, or in the next session, we'll actually do a practical transaction to demonstrate. So I know I'm throwing a lot of words at you guys right now. It's obviously sometimes easier just to understand when you see it being done. So it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. You create your transaction, you sign your transaction, you broadcast your transaction to the network. All the nodes in the network verify that your transaction is legitimate, and then they share it with one another if it is legitimate. And then once your transaction has been verified and accepted by the network, one of the miners is going to mine it, included in their block. So if the verification is successful, the transaction will be added to the ledger once a Bitcoin miner has mined it, and that serves as a secure, transparent record of all transactions. Once confirmed, the ownership of the Bitcoin is officially transferred from the sender to the recipients. So in summary, the digital signature created with the sender's private key serves as proof of authenticity and ownership, allowing Bitcoin's decentralized network to validate and record the transaction on the ledger. Right. Have you got any questions so far? If not, I'm going to open up Sparrow here. We'll restart in Signet. I'll open up Blockstream app. And let's do a little demonstration of a transaction. We'll do a transaction using Signet, which is a test net, but it works much the same as mainnet, which is the main Bitcoin network. And here you can see I've got a fresh wallet. It's a Pada One wallet. They send you 150,000 free Signet sats when you download and install Pada One wallets. They're not real Bitcoin, but like I said, they function very much the same as Bitcoin. So there's my one wallet with a balance of 150,000 sats. Let me take a look. Let me show you guys another wallet. So these are both desktop wallets, right? This one over here is the Blockstream app. And you can see I've got a testnet sats here, a Signet wallet here, and it's empty. So let me try and send some sats to this wallet. So I'm going to receive. I'm going to copy my receive address, and then I'm going to go over to the wallet where I actually have some funds, which is Sparrow. Okay, and from Sparrow, I'm going to say I want to send my transaction, and this is where we fill in the details of who we want to pay. There's my address. I'll call this a test transaction. That's just the label for my own record keeping. And the amount of sats I want to send. Let's send 50,000 sats. I can adjust my fee if I like, but I can see right now fees are relatively cheap. So I'm going to just create my transaction with everything else on default. So now I've created my transaction, and there it is. But it's not ready to be sent. Why? Because I haven't signed it with my private key. So this is an unsigned transaction. I need to finalize it for signing. Now that I've finalized it for signing by confirming all of the details, I'm ready to sign it. And because this is a hot wallet, my private keys are on this desktop wallet. And so the private keys are available here for me to sign. So I'm going to sign the transaction, and you can see there I've signed. But the rest of the Bitcoin network doesn't know anything about it. Why? Because I haven't broadcast it yet. So now here I have my final signed transaction, and it's ready to go. So I'm going to broadcast it. Once I click that broadcast transaction, there's no reversing it, right? Then it's going to be shared, if it's a valid transaction, with tens of thousands of nodes all across the world within a matter of less than a minute. So be sure that you've checked everything, especially the amount you want to send and the address that you want to send it to before you broadcast your signed transaction. And there we go. I've broadcast it. And you can see it says over here, unconfirmed. And that's because it's sitting in the queue, waiting to be mined. So we can actually go and have a look on mempool.space at this transaction. I'm going to copy, and hopefully we'll get to it before it confirms. Copy the transaction ID over there. And then let's bring up mempool.space. And if we have a look for our transaction over here on mempool.space, you'll see here it is in the queue. There's not a lot of transactions waiting in the queue because we're using testnet or signet, which is very quiet at the moment. But here it sits, it's not been mined. So theoretically, I could still go and replace this transaction with one that pays a higher fee and send it to a different address, or because it hasn't been confirmed yet, it's not finalized. And therefore, you should never accept an unconfirmed transaction. Don't hand over your money until the transaction has confirmed. And that is because this transaction could, as I said, be replaced by a transaction paying a higher fee. I could broadcast this transaction before it confirms with a higher fee, say 2 sats per virtual byte, and I could send it to a completely different address, at which point the Bitcoin that you thought you were going to receive will never arrive. Okay, so make sure that your transactions are confirmed before you accept them as final. So while we wait for that to confirm, let's carry on here with the rest of the slides. Hashing explanation. Please don't be intimidated by the technical terms and mathematical concepts ahead. While not everyone is crazy about math, you might surprise yourself and see that even the most complex ideas can be grasped with just a little bit of effort. So what is a function? A function is like a machine that takes some information and turns it into something new. The information you give the function is called the input, and the information that it spits out is called the output. Functions help computers to do tasks and solve problems efficiently. So you can picture it like this. Here's a function machine. We throw the inputs in, and it spits the outputs out. You can think of it also like a recipe for making a salad. The recipe would be the function, which tells you which ingredients to use, which would be your inputs, and how to mix them together to make the salad. You can put different ingredients in, but the recipe will always give you the salad as the output. Functions can be used to help make things easier and more efficient. So here again, you can see the recipe can be thought of as a function. The ingredients can be thought of as the inputs, and the salad can be thought of as the output. In Bitcoin, functions are utilized to execute transactions. We already know that transactions in Bitcoin are essentially transfers of value or money from one address to another. To perform a transaction, a number of cryptographic functions are used to validate the transaction and update the state of Bitcoin's ledger. The functions used in Bitcoin transactions include verifying the authenticity of the transaction inputs, checking that the sender has sufficient funds, and updating the balances of the relevant addresses. Once a transaction is verified and added to the block in the ledger, it becomes part of the permanent record of all transactions and cannot be reversed. Right, so what is a one-way function? Now we understand what functions are. What are one-way functions? These use a set of instructions to process the information and turn it into something new, like a smoothie recipe turns ingredients into a new drink. Just like you can't unblend the smoothie back into the inputs, you can't reverse a one-way function to get the original information back. Public key cryptography, of which the public key is a part of, relies on the use of one-way functions, which make it difficult to determine the private key from the public key. In theory, it's not impossible to find the private key from the public key, but it is extremely difficult to do so and would take an inordinate amount of time and computational power to accomplish. It's practically speaking impossible. Finding a private key from a public key in Bitcoin is like trying to find a needle in a haystack as large as a football field. At least, I would say it's probably even harder. The needle represents the private key, and the haystack represents the possible private keys. In the same way, one-way functions are designed to be irreversible and cannot be decrypted. Right, so now we know what functions are, we understand what one-way functions are. We can move on to what is a hash function. And a hash function is a type of one-way function. But first, you can see that our transaction here has been confirmed. We had one confirmation, and you can see that the transaction was mined by an unknown miner. It was included in this block 1 minute ago, block 280,791. The average fees paid for this block was between 1 and 200 sats per virtual byte, and there were 103 transactions included in this block. And you'll see as more blocks are added to the blockchain, my transaction will move along and receive additional confirmations with each additional block added to the blockchain, making it more and more impossible to reverse. Right, so what is a hash function? Hashing is like a fingerprint for digital data. It is a process of taking a digital message and turning it into a fixed length code, which serves as a unique identifier. Just like a fingerprint can identify a person, a hash can identify a digital message. Hashes are used in many applications, including Bitcoin transactions. How is hashing used in Bitcoin transactions? In Bitcoin, every transaction is hashed before it is added to a block in the ledger. The hash acts as a signature for the transaction, verifying that the transaction is valid and has not been tampered with. If someone tries to change even a single letter in the transaction, the hash will be completely different, alerting everybody else to the change. The role of hashing in providing security then. Hashing is essential to the security of the Bitcoin network. By using hashes to identify transactions, the network can detect any attempt to change or manipulate a transaction. This helps to prevent fraud and ensure that all transactions are recorded accurately in the ledger. A hash function is a type of one-way function that takes an input, referred to as the message or data or transaction, and converts it into a numerical representation referred to as a hash. The output hash is unique to the input data. So even the smallest change in the input data results in a completely different hash. And we'll take a look at an example of that in a minute. Here you can see an illustration of it. So a hash function is like a secret code machine. It takes in a message and turns it into a code. So you can throw any arbitrary text through this hash function, and it gives you this hash value. It's seemingly a random list of letters and numbers, but it is unique to that input. And you can put data of any arbitrary length. So it can be from one character through to an entire software library. You could put through a hash function and it's going to spit out a hash value. And what's interesting is that it's going to spit out a fixed length hash. So regardless of how much data we throw in our hash function, it's always going to produce a fixed length hash value. So again, we'll demonstrate that practically now. In the workbook, in the slides, you'll find this link over here, or you can just Google for any SHA-256 generator. There's lots of them online. It's just a very simple, you can do it on your own computer. Your computer has the ability to produce SHA-256 hashes of any data you ask it to. So for this example, we'll ask it to hash the string hello world. We'll generate the string, and you'll see we get a string reading B94D27, etc. Let's have a look again over here at the examples in the slide. And you can see over here, the SHA-256 hash of the string hello world is exactly the same as what we've just demonstrated, right? Have a look at the end, EFCDE9, and if we go back over here, EFCDE9, right? So we getting exactly the same results as they are in the student workbook, as you would expect. Let's try and add a full stop to this input and just take a little mental note of that. Let me make it a bit bigger for you guys. Of that SHA-256 hash there, right? Now, if I add a little full stop here and generate a new hash, you will see that my hash is now completely different. It's in no way similar to the original input hash, even though I've made the tiniest change, right? And again, if we compare here to the slides, we'll see the SHA-256 hash of hello world full stop, they get an identical result. Okay, so it's a unique fingerprint that identifies that input. And again, we can't reverse, right? We can't reverse this hash to determine the inputs. The only reason we know the inputs is because we've been told the inputs or we've discovered the inputs for ourselves over here. Let's say we increase the length of our inputs dramatically. Okay, that's sufficiently long. And we generate a new SHA-256 hash. You'll see that the hash function, the hash digest is no longer than it was for any of the other inputs. It's exactly the same length. Okay, so quite amazing technology, really. And again, you can put any data. It doesn't have to be text. You could hash this cat JPEG. And that way, if anybody changes the JPEG, if they add a whisker or remove a whisker, the hash of that JPEG would be completely different. And so you would know immediately that the photograph had been tampered with because it doesn't match your original hash. And this is very useful in checking that the software that you download is the software that you are intending to download and it hasn't been tampered with in transit or been somehow swapped out for malicious software. So you'll find that most good open source software will also, the developers will also supply you with the hash of that file so that you can check for yourself that the file you've got is the one that they published. Right, so the output or hash is always the same length, no matter how long the original information was. Because Bitcoin uses a few specific types of hash function called SHA-256 and RIPEM D160. A few examples are illustrated here, and you can see this third example, the SHA-256 hash of the downloadable ISO file. So that's a huge application file for installing the operating system, Ubuntu 18.10. So that's an actual installation application, and that's the SHA-256 hash. And you can see the same length, despite the fact that that's probably gigabytes in size. And why is this useful? It's useful because then I know that the file I downloaded is actually Ubuntu 18.10 and not some other random malicious file. Notice that a small change in the second input changes the output completely when compared to the first one, and that the third input is a huge file, and yet the output is still the same fixed length as the other two. Hashing can also be thought of as a musical score. You'll notice how jarring it is, or if it's been changed very easily. Similarly, by comparing the hash value of received data with the original hash value, one can determine if the data has been altered during transmission. Just 1 second. Just as a slight deviation in a musical performance can cause it to sound different, even the slightest change to the original data will result in a different hash value. This makes hashing a powerful tool for ensuring the integrity and authenticity of a Bitcoin transaction. The process of encoding the public key through hashing is used to improve the security of information by converting it into a fixed-length, unreadable format. Bitcoin uses the SHA-256 and RIPEM D160 algorithms to produce public addresses. The resulting output serves as a unique identifier for the public key and helps to ensure the integrity and security of transactions stored in the ledger. By encrypting the information in this way, it becomes more difficult for unauthorized individuals to access and manipulate the data. Here we have a little infographic illustrating hashing, specifically one-way hashing. A hash function takes any input and produces the fixed length output or hash. Here we throw these kiwis through a hash function and we get a kiwi smoothie. We throw oranges through the same hash function, we get an orange smoothie. We throw the strawberries through the same hash function, we get a strawberry smoothie. None of them can we reverse back into the inputs. So this means that these hash functions are deterministic. So the same ingredients always yield the same smoothie. They have pre-image resistance, which means that you can't glue together a strawberry when you are given a smoothie. They have correlation resistance, meaning that changing the ingredients a little results in a completely different smoothie. They have collision resistance. It's hard or next to impossible to find different ingredients that result in the same smoothie. And speed and verifiability. You throw fruit into the mixer, it's fast, and what comes out for sure is a smoothie. Okay. Any questions so far? We're all good. Okay, we're moving quite fast here. So we can always spend the extra time doing some practical demonstrations on UTXO management and that sort of thing. So speaking of which, and this is a very important concept to understand if you're to use Bitcoin on-chain. And if you're going to be using Bitcoin long-term as a savings vehicle, then you should be using Bitcoin on-chain. So what are UTXOs? UTXO stands for Unspent Transaction Output. In Bitcoin, transactions work like breaking a bigger piece of gold into smaller pieces and sending these smaller pieces both to others and to yourself. You can think of UTXOs as different sizes and pieces of Bitcoin or differently denominated bills in your wallet. When you spend a UTXO, it is recreated into a new UTXO for the receiver, and whatever is left over is sent back to you in a different new UTXO known as the change UTXO. This is much like, excuse me, this is This is much like using a $10 bill to buy 2 cups of coffee for $6. The coffee shop keeps a $6 piece and hands you a $4 piece in change. Here we can see that Alice wants to send Bob 6 Bitcoin, but she only has a UTXO of 10 Bitcoin. Poor old Alice. So she creates her transaction saying that she wants to send 6 Bitcoin to Bob. She signs her transaction. She broadcasts it to the network. The transaction gets mined, at which point this UTXO becomes spent. It's no longer spendable. And Bob gets a brand new UTXO of 6 Bitcoin. And Alice gets a brand new UTXO with her change of 4 Bitcoin, minus a small fee for the miner. When sending Bitcoin, you send the entire amount of one or more of your UTXOs in your Bitcoin wallets. Go ahead, Bitcoin Africa.
Hi, Glenn. Tell me a question. When you use the UTXO to send the Bitcoins to Bob and get back the change to Alice, was there the same fee that was used to pay for both transactions, or we have two fees involved here?
No, that's a great question. It's a single, that is a single transaction, even though that UTXO then gets split into two or more new UTXOs. Only the sender pays a single transaction fee for that transaction. So Bob will not pay anything. Only Alice will pay a fee.
Okay, so does it mean you can use this system to make a disbursement of payment for a large number of people?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can demonstrate how one can go about that when we do some of the practical UTXO managements.
Okay, thanks. Thanks,
No,
Glenn.
no problem. Right, so we'll actually try and do a bit of that before we wrap up this evening, because the practical stuff's quite fun, I find. So what happens is you send a piece to the recipient and you receive the remaining amount back as change to one of your new Bitcoin addresses. The change you receive is called an unspent transaction output, or UTXO, and it can be used as an input for a new future transaction. The balance of your Bitcoin wallet is the sum of all of your different UTXOs. So the sum of your UTXOs is the sum of the amounts of Bitcoin you own. So every time you receive a new Bitcoin, a new on-chain transaction, you are receiving a new UTXO. So if you're withdrawing Bitcoin from an exchange, you receive a new UTXO. When your friend sends you some on-chain Bitcoin, you receive a new UTXO. And the balance in your Bitcoin wallet represents the sum of all of the UTXO unspent transaction outputs you've received and obviously not yet spent. When a transaction is made, the amount of Bitcoin cents are divided into multiple outputs, each of which are associated with a new Bitcoin address or a new UTXO. So Natalie here wants to send Roberto half a Bitcoin. She has a single UTXO called here UTXOA, which contains one Bitcoin. She uses that UTXO as her input in the transaction. The output is a new UTXO, which goes to Roberto, and a new UTXO, which comes back to Natalie as change, right? You'll see here, Natalie's not getting her full half a Bitcoin back in change, and that's because she's had to pay a miner's fee. Luckily, it's not 0.1 Bitcoin. It's just, a few hundred sats at the current rates. So when sending Bitcoin to someone, you'll use one or more UTXOs as the source of the funds, your input or inputs. These UTXOs will be combined if necessary to create new outputs that belong to both the recipient of the transaction and yourself. These new outputs or UTXOs will become the recipient's property and the change your property. These UTXOs can then be used as the source of funds in other transactions. The chain of UTXOs creates a transparent, traceable history of all Bitcoin transactions on Bitcoin's ledger, starting from the very first block. So when you receive an on-chain payment, you can typically trace that UTXO's history all the way back to its genesis, to the block that it was first mined in. Here we have a little bit more of a complex example to illustrate how UTXOs, or why UTXOs might be combined in order to effect a payment. Here we have Alice who wants to pay Bob again. Alice has 4 UTXOs in her wallets this time. 1 UTXO for 2 BTC, 1 for 4, 1 for 8, and 1 for 9. She wants to send Bob 5 Bitcoin. So her wallet, or she, depending on which wallet she's using, she or her wallet software will combine these 2 UTXOs so that they cover enough to send Bob 5, because obviously either of those on their own is not enough. And so she combines those 2 UTXOs for her inputs. Once the transaction is mined, Bob gets a brand new UTXO for 5 Bitcoin, and Alice gets a brand new change UTXO for her 1 Bitcoin in change. And you'll see now she only has 3 UTXOs. Why? Because those 2 have been spent. So she's got her original unspent 8 and 9 and a brand new one for 1. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It's a very elegant system, really. Right, so if Alice attempts to use one of her already spent outputs to make another transaction, it would automatically be rejected by all of the other nodes on the network. This is because the nodes, every one of them, maintains a copy of Bitcoin's ledger and all its transactions. Actually, only the full nodes do. There are also pruned nodes that don't keep a full copy, but even those that are pruned will reject that transaction because they do keep a full set of the full UTXO set. So they can easily check the balance of Alice's UTXO and verify that the transaction is not valid, and they'll reject it. And so it doesn't get propagated from one node to the next. It just dies in its track. At broadcast, just gets nowhere. On the following slide, there's a screenshot of a real transaction where there is only one input. However, the starting balance could, in another case, be the sum of multiple UTXOs, multiple inputs. What observations can we make when we look at these 2 transactions? You'll see this one over here has 1 input. This one at the bottom has 3 inputs. Okay, so these are 2 different transactions we're looking at. The top transaction has 1 input with 2 outputs and a fee, and the bottom transaction has 3 inputs with 2 outputs and a fee. So they both have that in common, that they have 2 outputs and a fee. What else can we see that they have in common? What else are the questions we have here? Do the inputs match the outputs? And we can see that they do, that if we add these all up, we'll see that the input matches the outputs. Similarly over here, these inputs match the total value, which also match the outputs. So on both of those transactions, the inputs match the outputs. What else can we spot? Can you describe the details of the transaction? So we've already noted that this one's got 1 input, this one's got 3 inputs. What other details can we surmise here? So one of the things that I would say, if we have a look here at the outputs, if we were to guess, we would say that we would guess that the 14.3489850 is the change, right? Because that would be a very arbitrary number of Bitcoin, of sats to be sending somewhere or to someone. It's far more likely that the 10 sats, the 10 Bitcoin over here, is either a payment or a consolidation, and that this is the change. That seems like a reasonable assumption. It's probably, not 100% certain, but is a very reasonable assumption. And the same, if we look at this bottom transaction, I think it's reasonable to assume that the 24.34901060 is change, because that would be a very arbitrary number of sats to be sending someone. Far more likely that this 50 Bitcoin was being sent either to someone or consolidated. And we'll talk a little bit more about what consolidated What else can we see? Are there any similarities between this top transaction and the bottom transaction? Is there any connection whatsoever? Anybody? Go for it, Odi Divine. What do
All
you
right.
see?
Yeah, in my own understanding, the first transaction has one input into this, and it gives out two outputs with a fee. So the input is also equal to the output. Same thing applies to the second transaction, which has three input, and the output is equally the same with the input. So I think both of them has the same input. The input is equal to the output. That's just my understanding, basically.
That's right. So, and that should always be the case. Okay. But what I'm looking for here is that you'll note that this output over here of 24.349 is identical to this input. You can see here the 3LK V90, the hash over there. And so we know that that is the same UTXO, right? And what does that tell us? Can we figure out from knowing that which transaction came first? Go for it, Odie.
Okay, my understanding, the transaction below came first, producing the one at the top.
Perfect. Excellent. That's quite right. So this one at the top could never have existed, or this transaction could never have been made if this UTXO did not exist. And this UTXO only exists because this transaction took place. So this transaction definitely came first. Okay, so I hope that's well understood. Fairly simple. It looks a lot more complicated than it really is. Okay, so let's just see where we are here. I think let's just do these next couple of slides, then we're basically halfway through the slides, and then we'll just use the last half an hour to do some practical transactions and mess around with UTXOs, because I find that's the easiest way to actually understand them. So before we do, let's just read these last two slides and have a closer look at Bitcoin nodes and miners. Bitcoin nodes, these are like the gatekeepers of validation, whose main job is to keep a copy of Bitcoin's ledger. They make sure that all transactions are valid and that everyone follows the rules. By spreading this job out amongst many people worldwide, Bitcoin stays strong against potential problems. These nodes help keep the system trustworthy and true to its decentralized idea, where no one person or group has too much power. And there's literally tens of thousands of people all around the world that run these nodes voluntarily. Then we have Bitcoin miners. These are like the architects of security that use powerful computers and electricity to check and confirm transactions, making sure that everything is secure. This work helps make the ledger or blockchain resistant to any bad actors trying to mess things up, and ensures the network remains decentralized. Together, Bitcoin nodes and miners work as a team to maintain a decentralized, secure, and strong system, a new way of handling money that people all around the world can rely on. Let's explore these roles in more detail in the next session, and have a look at some of this. So here we can see that we have testnet on Signet. There hasn't been another block mined yet. That's why we still only have one confirmation here. But if we go back and have a look now at our Blockstream wallets over there, did I send it to this one, I think? We should see that transaction having landed in this, and there you can see I've got my 50,000 sats received, and you can see it's got one confirmation. It says here one of 6 confirmations. And that's because traditionally, back in the day, it was considered wise to wait for 6 confirmations before considering a transaction as finalized, because to try and roll back 6 blocks in the blockchain is impossible. But given the level of security on the Bitcoin network these days, honestly, if you've got more than a couple of confirmations, you're just fine, right? If it's a really big amount and you're really concerned, wait for 2 confirmations. You'll find that even most of the big exchanges now, as soon as your deposit has 2 confirmations, they'll let you sell or buy. Right. So let's have a look here. You can see in this wallet we can see our transactions. Then we can also see our addresses, and this is great because it means that we can verify that the address. So if we may be using a watch wallet on another device, we can cross-check. Or if we're using a BTC Pay server that this wallet is hooked up to, we can actually check that the addresses that our other infrastructure is generating are the addresses that our wallet is generating. But I'm showing you this because it's important to note that addresses are not the same thing as UTXOs. You'll see that my wallets, any Bitcoin wallets, can create an almost infinite amount of unique addresses that belong to your wallet and your wallet alone. All right, so it's not just these 10 that are here. Once these 10 have been used, your wallet won't reuse addresses. If it's a good wallet, it'll only use the address once, and then it'll use the next and the next and the next, and it'll just keep generating new wallet addresses for the rest of time. So addresses are distinct from UTXOs. Blockstream calls UTXOs coins. And you can see I have a single coin or UTXO in my wallet. Were I to receive some more Bitcoin to this wallet, I would get a new UTXO. And we can do that. If we go back, let's get a receive address over here. I'm going to copy my receive address, and let's head back over to Sparrow again. And let's send another 25,000 sats over to that Blockstream Green app. And so I'll paste my address in there. I'll just call this 25K. Let's call it 25,000 sats. And I'll leave everything else on default. I'll create the transaction, finalize, sign, and broadcast. Now, we'll again have to wait for this transaction to be mined. While we do, let's just pop back over here to Blockstream Green, and you can see it's already registered that transaction there. It's unconfirmed, right? And I can even see it in my coins. I can see that new UTXO. It's unconfirmed, so I can't spend it yet, but I can see that it's on its way to me, right? So again, I'm not going to consider that final until it's been confirmed. I also can't spend it until it's confirmed. So though my total balance here does say I've got 75,000 sats, until this one confirms, I'm only able to spend this UTXO. All right, so let's get another address. And let's just do that one more time. What am I doing here? And let's do it one more time. And this time we'll just send 10,000 sats. And I'll leave everything else as is. Create contract, finalize, sign, and broadcast to the network. And it's off. Right. So probably these 2 transactions are going to be mined in the same block. You can see they're both confirmed, unconfirmed. This one here is now, I think, more than one confirmation, it looks like. While we wait for those to confirm, let's go again back over here to block stream green. And you can see now I have 3 UTXOs. Obviously, those two still to confirm, but 3 chunks of Bitcoin. And you can see my total balance represents the sum of my 3 UTXOs. I hope that's all clear. Pretty simple, really. But I think a very misunderstood aspect of how Bitcoin works. Now, I mentioned consolidation. So what is consolidation? Consolidation is managing your UTXOs. So what you don't want at the end of the day in your wallets is too many small UTXOs or too many large UTXOs for that matter. And this is for 2 reasons. Well, primarily 2 reasons. Firstly, is you don't want to waste too much money on fees. If you have too many small UTXOs, you're going to pay very high fees because the more UTXOs that are required to facilitate a payment, the larger the data set required to be stored in the block, right? So the more space you're taking up in the block, the higher fee you're going to pay for your transaction. So the more inputs in your transaction, the more space your transaction takes up in the block. The block has limited space. Let's go back over here to mempool.space. And let's just go to mainnet. And you can see that there's only a limited amount of space in a block. All of these blocks over here are full. And the reason I know they're full is because they are not like this. This one here is empty. You can see it's only got 548 transactions in this block. Okay, that's because the network has been pretty quiet as of late. So every now and again, all of the pending transactions that are in the queue actually clear. And then there's no transactions pending. And then the miners are left mining half-empty blocks. See, here's a few more half-empty blocks. For the most part, you're going to see that blocks are I'm not sure why. Maybe just try and refresh. Can everyone else see it okay? Yeah, okay, just try and refresh there. Right, but so if we have a look at these full blocks, you'll note that at most they have close to 6,000 transactions. It's very, very seldom you're going to find more than 4,000 transactions. You can see on average between 3,000 and 4,000 transactions is what one would expect to fit into a block. So, barring very small transactions, which probably in this block over here with, close to 6,000 transactions being crammed full of probably very, very small transactions. Whereas, this block over here also full, but full with only 1,600 transactions. So much bigger transactions in this block than in this one, more than twice the size if both of those blocks are completely full, which they look to be. You can see if I go to any of these blocks, we can actually go and look and see which transactions were included in that specific block. So if your transaction clears in that block, you can actually come and find it here. And you can see all kinds of lovely details about your transaction, whether you overpaid, what kind of transaction it was. So here we have a classic consolidation transaction. And you can see that it has an enormous amount of inputs, over 100 inputs. And it only has the one output and the fee. So this is somebody who is consolidating all of these UTXOs into one UTXO. And this may be to save on fees later. This is could well be somebody who's been dollar cost averaging over the last year or more, and is now consolidating all those chunks of Bitcoin that he withdrew off the exchange over the last year into one UTXO into his cold storage for safekeeping. And to your question earlier there, but Africa, the reverse is completely true as well. We can take a single UTXO like this and we can break it up into many, whether that's to many different individuals or many UTXOs back to ourselves. So for example, let's go, I still haven't confirmed, so let's just go and have a look at a different wallet. I'll try and find one that I've got a balance on. Let me bring up Sparrow wallets again and see if we can what is this? There we go. Okay, here you can see I've got a nice well-funded testnet wallets. Those aren't real sats, unfortunately. 1.6 million testnet sats over here. Now, this looks slightly different than Blockstream Green. You can see they don't call them coins. They properly call them UTXOs. So if I come and have a look here at my UTXOs, you can see in this wallet, I have 4 UTXOs. I have this huge one for over 1 million sats, and then I have these 3 little ones. So I can consolidate these 3. Let's say I want to consolidate those 3 into one UTXO. I'm going to select those 3 UTXOs, and I'm going to send them to myself. I'm simply going to go and get a receive address for my own wallet, and I'm going to send those 3 UTXOs to myself. And that's, I'm going to call a consolidation transaction. I'm going to create it, finalize, sign, and broadcast. And now, if we come back over here to my UTXOs, you'll see I only have 2. I have that original big one that I haven't spent, and then those 3 that I just spent are gone, and I've got this nice chunky one in return. Similarly, if I wanted to break this one up into smaller UTXOs, I can go and I can send this one to myself, and I can just send it to 10 different of my own addresses. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to get an address, I'm going to go to send, I'm going to pay some of this Bitcoin back to myself. Let's make it 100,000 sats back to myself. I call this also consolidation, or I could call it UTXO management, whatever I want, right? So that's my first transaction. I'm going to add, well, it's still the same transaction, but that's my first, this is a batch transaction. So I'm going to add another one. I'm going to get a new address, and I'm going to send another 100,000 sats to this address. And then I'm going to come and get another address, all to my own wallet. I'm going to add another one. And let's do another 100,000 sats. I'll do 2 more for good measure. I'm going to receive, get a new address, make, what did I do? Add another one. Oh, what happened there? You can also do this with a CSV if you want. If you've got a spreadsheet already with, pre-populated with the people that you're paying's addresses, make it a little bit simpler. Or even if you want to do that way for your own UTXO management. And let's do one more for good measure. So I'm going to now basically break off 500,000 sats from that one chunk, right? So I've got that one big chunk of 1 million sats. I'm going to break off, by doing this, 5 chunks of 10,000 sats. And you can see here, here's my one input of 1.1 million sats, and here's my outputs. I've got one for 100,000, another for 100,000, another for 100, 2 more for 100, and my change, plus the miner fee. before we go forward, go ahead, Bitcoin Africa. You got it.
Glenn, sorry to ask, but if I had to send an equal amount to, let's say, 100,000 address, when I do a confirmation and a broadcast, it is considered as one transaction, one fee?
Yes.
Or every single disbursement would be considered a transaction with a fee?
No. So it's one transaction, but bear in mind that every extra output or every extra input that you're creating increases the weight of your transaction. It makes your transaction bigger. You're taking up more space in the block. So you're going to watch what happens to my fee over there, right? My fee is going to go up as I add more and more outputs. It's still one transaction, but because my transaction is getting more complex and taking up more space in the block, my fee goes up. So the fee is calculated according to the weight, the virtual weight of your transaction. In other words, the amount of data that your transaction is going to take up in that block. You got to pay your fair share for your space.
Okay, but yeah, no, okay, I got it. But does it mean that am I saving a cost apart from the fact that it's easier to do it for 100,000 addresses?
Much cheaper.
Much cheaper. Okay, that's what I want to know. Okay, cool. All right.
Than sending individual transactions, right? So here, for example, here I've got 6 outputs, right? And I'm only paying 265 sats. If I was to send, I don't want to undo this. We'll go and have a look at what one output costs in a minute. So I don't want to now undo the work I've done to set this transaction up. Let's just send it, and then we'll come back and check what is the fee, how does it compare if we have only one output. It's not going to be that different. It's going to be a little bit cheaper, but not a lot cheaper.
Sure.
Okay, so 22 cents. Create the transaction, finalize, sign. Broadcast. And now if we go and have a look at our UTXOs, you'll see I've got these beautiful 500,000 UTXO coins. Much more convenient now if I want to go and do a small purchase. I'm not having to spend that big chunk and give away a whole bunch of privacy. So we'll talk about why it is you don't want to just have one big UTXO in a minute. But so there you can see how easy it is for me to manage my UTXOs, whether that be to combine them or to split them. Now let's have a look if we were to send just a basic one input, one output transaction to compare what kind of a fee we would pay versus that batch transaction. Again, let's just do 100,000 sats. Okay, now you can see it's wanting to consolidate these. So I'm just going to come over here to my UTXOs, and I'm actually going to just spend one of them. I'm going to spend this one because I want a simple transaction just to compare the fee, right? So there you can see I've got one input and one output. The fee is 9 cents instead of 22 cents equivalents for that batch transaction. But multiply 9 times 6, and we're left with a much higher rate than what I paid at 22 sats, right? So I'm saving by doing that batch transaction, no doubt. Okay. Any other questions? Go for it.
Okay, so can you individually cancel some of those UTXO once you have broadcasted it or signed? No.
Well, no. Look, these have already now have they been confirmed? They haven't been confirmed. So the fact that they haven't been confirmed, I can theoretically cancel them now if I were to do a replace by fee transaction. So if I come back over here to my transactions, and this one here where I am doing my split, my UTXO management split. If I go and have a look at that transaction, it hasn't confirmed. So that means I can actually come back here and I can do a replace by fee. And that means I can send basically the same transaction, but offer to pay a higher fee so that the miner will mine this transaction rather than the other one. So I can now just cancel all of these. And I can just say, nah, you know what, bugger all those guys. I'm just going to send everything back to myself. I'm going to create the transaction, finalize, sign. Broadcast. And now this is going to override that earlier transaction. And that's why I said to you earlier, never accept an unconfirmed transaction, because we can now see there that transaction's gone. It's disappeared from our transaction list. It's been replaced by this one. And now if I go and have a look at my UTXOs, I'm back down to only 2 because I canceled that one. But once it's confirmed, forget about it. Yeah. So you want to be dead sure before you broadcast a transaction that it's correct and that you want to send it, because you might broadcast it and the block can be mined the very next second, and there's no going back. Like once it's mined, it's mined. There's nothing you can do about it. So don't broadcast the transaction unless you're really sure that you want it to be included in a block, because chances are it will be.
But Glenn, last question here. But in the modern wallet of Bitcoin, I have noticed the button is just sent.
Yes, yeah. So most modern user interfaces, even if we go and have a look at Blockstream app there, for example, most of the I was finding you guys here again. Sorry, give me a second. Most modern wallets, as you say, obfuscates a lot of the process in the background. So when that's not the right one. Hold on. When I send, for example, a transaction using Blockstream, let's send some sats back to Sparrow here. Let me get an address quickly in Sparrow. You'll see the process looks completely different in Blockstream app, and that's because Sparrow is a lot more transparent as to the might be mempool. That this one's fine. Not sure what that's about. Anyway, let's see. So you'll see if I want to send from Blockstream, it doesn't have the same process as Sparrow. So different wallets look a little bit different. Everything they're doing in the background is exactly the same, but what you're seeing is, looks a little bit different because most of the modern wallets choose to obfuscate a lot of the process away from the end user. So when I compile my transaction here, I'm going to send 50,000 sats back. Okay, I can't because that hasn't confirmed yet. Let's just wait for this to confirm. I see they have just confirmed now, I think. Let's see. Okay, well, as luck would have it now, of course, Blockstream's not working with testnets. I don't know why. Let me just try and shut it down. and reopen it. Might be mempool.space's Signet server just having a hiccup there. Let's try again. Still okay, but there we go. I can see it's confirmed. So now I should be able to send to my Sparrow address. I'm going to send 50,000 sats. Okay, that's why, because I'm not on sats. Okay, let's go to sats. I'm trying to send 50,000 Bitcoin there. Okay, there we go. I'm going to send 50,000 testnet sats to my Sparrow wallet. Okay. You can see I've got the option here for manual coin selection if I want to choose which UTXO I want to send, but I'm happy for the wallet to choose for me. So some wallets won't even give you the option to choose which UTXO you're going to spend. It's just going to obfuscate even that, and it's going to do your coin management for you, right? So Blockstream app and Sparrow give you far more control over your UTXOs, and that's very important when using Bitcoin on chain. So I'll go next. So all that is happening here when I click next is I'm confirming and finalizing my transaction details in the same way I do in Sparrow, right? The only thing that you're not seeing here is the signing and broadcasting. It's basically lumping both of those steps into two. When I click this confirm transaction, Blockstream app is going to sign the transaction and broadcast it. It's not going to wait for me to broadcast it. It's just going to take it as like if I say, okay, I'm confirming it, it's going to say, right, that's it. You're good to go. I'm going to sign it and broadcast it. And there it's gone. So, but it's doing exactly the same thing as Sparrow in the background. It's just not pausing each step. I love that Sparrow does that because it educates the user as to what's actually going on. Sparrow is a fantastic piece of software. And there's full of little hidden tool tips and things. If you hover over, let's bring Sparrow back up. If you actually hover over elements of the UI, it'll tell you all kinds of lovely stuff. Like I can see here that that's my inputs. I can see that that's the outputs. I can see that these are what each of these numbers represents, the SegWit marker, flags, number of inputs, block time. Really cool stuff you can learn, even just from, if you go to the wallet itself here, you'll find, where is it now? You move things around a bit, but you'll find all kinds of interesting things if you use it for long enough. And there we can see now that 50,000 sats from Blockstream is appeared in my Sparrow wallet as a brand new UTXO. It's unconfirmed because it hasn't been mined yet. And if we go back and have a look at, again, the Blockstream app, and we have a look at our coins here, we'll see we're now down to 2. That's because we spent in this transaction, we spent 2. Let's go and have a look at the actual transaction on mempool.space. And we should see that I had 2 inputs. Yeah, 2 inputs. And that explains why in the Blockstream app, I'm down to only 2 UTXOs, or as they call them, coins. There's my UTXOs, and you can see I got my unspent UTXO, and then I've got this one back in change, right? I sent the 50,000 sats to Sparrow, and I received a brand new UTXO back in this wallet with my change. I'm down to 2 UTXOs. and I might as well just send all those sats over to my Sparrow wallets. Let's drain this one. So I'll just send, paste in my address. I'll send all. Next, confirm. Done. And I know I can get rid of this one. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of the session. I'm happy to hang around if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, we'll pick up where we left off next session. I'm not sure when that is, Destiny. Is it Wednesday? Wednesday. Okay, cool. And there you can see I got no UTXOs because my wallet's empty. Okay, cool, guys. Well, if you got no questions, okay, I see there. What is dollar cost averaging? Well, do we all know what dollar cost averaging is? Or was that a question? Yeah. Wish we still had that UTXO here. There it is. So no, there you go. So UTXO is a solid investment strategy when it comes to, well, any asset really, but it works very well for volatile assets like Bitcoin. And the dollar cost average strategy is this, is that you just buy a set amount of Bitcoin at a set time on a regular basis. And the benefits of this is that it smooths out the volatility. It means that you get more Bitcoin for your fiat when the price is low, and you buy a bit less Bitcoin for your fiat when the price is high. But the most important thing is that it removes all the emotion from accumulating Bitcoin. You don't worry about the price. You just buy regardless. And that's what it looks like this individual was probably doing. It was just stacking on a regular basis over an extended period of time, and eventually managed to accumulate, over 3 Bitcoin. And that's just like steady dollar cost averaging. It works out very, very effectively over time. You can Google, there's quite a few of them online. Google for a Bitcoin dollar cost averaging calculator, and you can work out for yourself how, what kind of a crazy results you can actually get from the strategy, especially historically, just looking back at how well that strategy has worked for people. Okay, cool, man. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday. And you got any questions, just drop them in the chat, in the WhatsApp or the Telegram. I'm sure Destiny or somebody will be able to help. Otherwise, DM me as well. I'm always happy to help. Cheers all.
Please, you promised that you record a session that I missed. I don't know if you were able to do it for me.